They say there are places in Middle-earth where even memory dares not linger, and the Rangers have carried that warning through the generations. Greetings, friends. I am the Ranger, a wanderer of forgotten roads, and tonight I bring you a tale whispered beneath ancient stars and buried beneath older stone. Beyond the known paths lie secrets that were never meant to be found, and shadows that remember more than they should. Come, draw closer to the fire, and let the road begin. The wind came down from the high shoulders of the misty mountains, with the bite of lingering winter still hidden in its breath. It wandered through the dark pines and over the stony ridges east of the range, stirring old needles upon the forest floor and carrying with it the scent of distant snow. Beneath a sky of pale silver clouds, a solitary traveler moved along a forgotten path that few living folk could name. His gray cloak shifted softly around his boots, and the staff in his hand tapped against stone with a patient rhythm. To those who glimpsed him from afar, he seemed merely an old wanderer. Yet the birds watched his passing with bright eyes, and even the wary foxes slipped from his path without knowing why. Gandalf the Grey had spent many years crossing the wild lands of Middle-earth, and he had learned to heed small signs. Great evils often announced themselves with trumpets and fire, but trouble usually began in quieter ways. A bent branch where none should be broken, a silence among birds, a rumor repeated by frightened travelers. Such things had led him to many discoveries over the centuries. As he walked beneath the pines, his sharp eyes studied the ground and the shadows between the trees. Something had disturbed the region during recent weeks. He could not yet name it, but the feeling followed him like a distant footstep. The previous evening he had shared a campfire with woodmen from the upper vales of Anduin. They had spoken little at first, for the wild had taught them caution, yet once trust had been earned, their tongues had loosened. One gray-bearded hunter had told of strange lights appearing among the eastern hills. Another spoke of orcs moving south in unusual numbers. None of this alone was remarkable, for orcs were never wholly absent from the world. But there had been something in their voices that lingered in Gandalf's thoughts. They were not merely afraid, they were confused. The stories did not fit together, as though many scattered events were somehow connected by an unseen hand. Near midday, he emerged from the forest onto a stretch of rocky highland, where the trees thinned and the land opened toward distant hills. The wind was stronger there. It tugged at his beard and carried a harsh cry across the empty ground. Gandalf halted at once. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. A raven wheeled overhead before vanishing westward. He narrowed his eyes and listened carefully. Somewhere ahead, beyond a cluster of broken ridges, steel had recently met steel. Without haste, though with increasing attention, he climbed toward the source. The path wound through weathered stone outcrops that rose from the earth like ancient teeth. Here and there lay patches of old snow hidden from the sun. The wizard found tracks among them. Several booted feet had passed this way, accompanied by heavier prints that belonged to orcs. He crouched and touched one mark with his fingers. The edges remained sharp. The trail was fresh, perhaps only a few hours old. His expression darkened. The tracks led him into a narrow valley where the wind could scarcely reach. Silence hung there. Not the peaceful silence of untouched wilderness, but the uneasy stillness that follows violence. Gandalf smelled blood before he saw its source. A few moments later he came upon the remains of a battle. 3 dead orcs lay scattered among the stones, their black gear stained dark, and their cruel weapons broken. Nearby rested the bodies of 2 men clad in worn traveling cloaks. Carrion birds had not yet discovered them. The wizard removed his hat, and stood quietly for a time. The men appeared to have been guards or messengers, rather than soldiers. One still clutched a broken spear. The other lay upon his back, staring at the sky with lifeless eyes. Gandalf knelt beside him and examined the scene. The struggle had been fierce, but brief. The men had been outnumbered. Yet something about the dead orcs drew his attention. Their armor bore no mark he recognized. That alone was unusual. Most orc bands served some stronger master and carried a sign of allegiance. He moved among the fallen bodies until he found what troubled him most. One orc lay farther from the others, half concealed behind a boulder. Unlike his companions, he had not died from blade or spear. A black wound marked his chest, though no weapon remained there. The flesh around it appeared scorched. Gandalf frowned and rested his hand near the injury without touching it. The stone beneath the corpse felt strangely cold, not naturally cold. It carried a faint memory of power, as though something ancient had brushed against the world and vanished. "Curious," Gandalf murmured. His voice sounded small within the silent valley. He studied the wound again. "Very curious indeed." Rising to his feet, he searched the dead orc more thoroughly. The creature carried little of value. A jagged knife, a pouch of dried meat, several crude tokens carved from bone. Then, hidden beneath a torn flap of leather near its belt, Gandalf discovered a small object wrapped in filthy cloth. The bundle was surprisingly heavy. He unfolded it slowly, and for the first time that day, genuine surprise touched his face. Resting in his palm lay a black stone no larger than a hen's egg. Its surface appeared smooth at first glance, yet faint lines ran across it in patterns too precise to be natural. The stone seemed older than the hills themselves. Gandalf felt a chill pass through his fingers. He had handled many strange things in his long life: rings of power, treasures from forgotten kingdoms, relics buried since the Elder Days. This object belonged among none of them. It carried no familiar presence. Instead, it felt like a fragment of some story that had been deliberately erased. The wizard wrapped the stone again and slipped it carefully into his pouch. At once he sensed a faint pressure within his thoughts, so brief that he might have mistaken it for imagination. A whisper without words, a distant call heard across immeasurable years. He straightened slowly and gazed toward the eastern horizon, where blue hills faded into shadow. Somewhere beyond them lay the source of this mystery. The feeling was gone now, but it left behind an unease that no amount of reasoning could dismiss. As evening approached, Gandalf buried the dead men beneath a cairn of stones. The labor took longer than he expected, yet he did not hurry. Such duties mattered. When the work was finished, he stood before the graves and bowed his head. Then he turned eastward once more. The clouds above had thickened, and the last light of day shone red beneath their edges. Far away, almost hidden among the darkening hills, a single point of pale fire flickered and vanished. Gandalf saw it clearly. His eyes narrowed, and his grip tightened around his staff. Whatever road had opened before him this day, it was leading somewhere forgotten, and old instincts warned him that he had just taken the first step into a danger far older than orcs. The pale light he had glimpsed vanished so quickly that Gandalf could not be certain whether it had been fire, sorcery, or merely some trick of the evening haze. Yet the feeling left behind was real enough. He continued eastward until darkness settled fully upon the land, and the hills became black shapes beneath the stars. At last he found shelter beneath a shelf of weathered stone overlooking a narrow valley. There he kindled a small fire, more for comfort than necessity, and sat watching the flames dance among the shadows. Again and again, his thoughts returned to the black stone hidden within his pouch. It seemed to possess weight beyond its size, as though ancient years clung to it like dust. For a long time, he resisted examining it further. Experience had taught him caution. Many strange things desired attention, and some dangers grew stronger when curiosity fed them. Yet before midnight, he finally withdrew the stone and placed it upon a flat rock before him. The firelight touched its surface, revealing patterns that had escaped his notice earlier. Thin lines crossed and intertwined in deliberate designs. They resembled writing, though not in any script known to elves, dwarves, or men. Gandalf leaned closer. The markings seemed to shift at the edge of sight, arranging themselves into shapes that vanished whenever he tried to focus upon them directly. A cold breeze drifted through the camp. The fire crackled uneasily. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, though the sound came from very far away. Gandalf laid one hand upon the stone. At once, a vision flashed through his mind. He saw towering mountains beneath unfamiliar stars, vast halls carved into black rock, a door of silver standing open while pale figures entered carrying lamps that burned with white fire. Then the image shattered. The wizard drew back sharply. The vision had lasted less than a heartbeat, yet its clarity startled him. He remained awake until dawn. Sleep came only in brief fragments, and each time he closed his eyes, he glimpsed pieces of things long vanished. Ancient roads, empty chambers, voices speaking in a language older than memory. By morning he had reached one conclusion. The stone was no work of orcs. Indeed, it seemed unlikely that any orc could have understood its significance. They had stolen it from somewhere or been ordered to carry it. The question was, by whom? The following day brought rain. Thick clouds rolled down from the mountains and covered the sky from horizon to horizon. Gandalf traveled through cold mist and steady drizzle, following signs left by the orc band. The trail wound eastward into rough country seldom visited by travelers. At midday, he discovered another clue. Hidden beneath an overhang of stone lay the remains of an abandoned camp. The fire pit was recent. Footprints surrounded it. Most belonged to orcs, but not all. Kneeling beside the ashes, Gandalf found evidence of at least one dwarf. The boot marks were unmistakable. Nearby, he discovered traces left by a horse. More surprising still, there were signs of a struggle. Blood stained the earth. Broken arrows lay scattered among the rocks. One shaft bore gray feathers of a kind favored by the rangers of the north. Gandalf's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Whatever hunt was unfolding across these hills, others had already become involved. As afternoon faded, the rain finally ceased. A weak sun emerged behind thinning clouds, casting pale light over the wilderness. Gandalf climbed a ridge and paused to survey the lands ahead. Beyond the rolling hills rose a darker line of mountains, unlike the misty mountains behind him. Their peaks were jagged and steep. Few maps marked them. Fewer still gave them names. Between those heights lay deep valleys where shadows lingered even at noon. It was toward those mountains that the tracks continued. Near sunset, he spotted movement far below. A lone figure was crossing a stream at the bottom of a rocky ravine. Gandalf watched carefully. The traveler moved with skill and caution, pausing often to examine the ground. He wore a hooded cloak and carried a long bow across his back. After several moments, Gandalf began descending toward him. The stranger noticed the approach almost immediately. By the time Gandalf reached the ravine, an arrow was already nocked. The ranger relaxed only slightly upon recognizing the old wizard. He lowered his bow but kept a wary eye upon the surrounding hills. His face was lean and weathered, marked by long years spent in the wild. "Gandalf," he said, "I did not expect to meet you here." The wizard smiled faintly. "Nor I you. Yet chance meetings are seldom chance where trouble gathers." The ranger glanced eastward. "Then you know of it as well?" Gandalf studied him carefully. "Perhaps. Tell me what you have seen." They made camp together beneath a cluster of twisted pines as darkness approached. The ranger introduced himself as Halbarad, one of the Dunedain who watched over Eriador. While sharing a simple meal, he spoke of his pursuit. Several weeks earlier, scattered reports had reached the rangers concerning orc movements far beyond their usual territories. Small bands traveled east carrying unknown cargo. More troubling still, some seemed willing to kill one another over it. "I tracked one such band from the high pass," Halbarad said quietly. "When I finally caught them, another group had already attacked. They slaughtered each other almost to the last creature." Gandalf listened without interruption. When the ranger finished, he removed the black stone from his pouch and set it between them. The effect was immediate. Halbarad stared at it in silence. The campfire reflected upon the polished surface like blood-red light upon dark water. "That," the ranger said at last, "is what they were carrying." Neither man spoke for several moments. The wind whispered through the trees overhead. Then Gandalf looked toward the eastern mountains where night had swallowed every distant peak. The mystery had deepened. Orcs hunted one another for possession of the stone. Rangers pursued them. Strange lights appeared among forgotten hills, and somewhere ahead, hidden beneath ancient rock and older secrets, waited the source of it all. Dawn arrived beneath a blanket of low clouds that turned the eastern sky the color of cold iron. Gandalf and Halbarad left their camp before sunrise, moving quietly through the hills while mist drifted across the valleys below. The land seemed emptier than it should have been. No deer crossed their path. No birds sang among the rocks. Even the wind carried an unnatural stillness. As the morning wore on, Gandalf found himself watching the horizon more often than the ground, for he had begun to feel that unseen eyes were observing their progress. The ranger sensed it as well. Shortly before noon, he halted beside a cluster of boulders and crouched low. Gandalf joined him without a word. Far ahead, perhaps half a mile distant, dark figures were moving along the side of a ridge. There were 6 of them, orcs. They traveled quickly despite the rough terrain and frequently glanced behind them. One carried a bundle wrapped in black cloth. Another limped badly. Whatever errand drove them onward, fear appeared to be urging them faster than any captain's command. "They are running from something," Halbarad said quietly. "Yes," Gandalf replied. "The question is whether they flee toward danger or away from it." The answer came sooner than either expected. A sharp cry echoed across the hills. One of the orcs collapsed, an arrow protruding from its throat. The others scattered instantly. Another arrow followed, then another. From hidden positions among the rocks, unseen attackers descended upon the fleeing creatures. Steel flashed. Harsh voices rose in alarm. The skirmish lasted less than a minute. When silence returned, all 6 orcs lay dead. Gandalf and Halbarad exchanged glances before advancing cautiously toward the scene. Whoever had carried out the ambush possessed considerable skill. The attackers had already gathered the bodies into a rough pile by the time the 2 companions arrived. There were 3 of them. One was a broad-shouldered dwarf with a dark beard braided beneath a weather-worn cloak. Another was an elf clad in green and brown, carrying a long knife at his side. The third was a young man whose face bore the scars of many hard journeys. All three turned at once as Gandalf approached. The dwarf lowered his axe first. "Well," he said, squinting through his beard, "if it isn't Gandalf, I begin to think every road in Middle-earth eventually crosses yours." A smile touched the wizard's face. "And yours as well, Borin, son of Bor." The dwarf grunted. "Aye. Though I would rather have found a warm hall than these cursed hills." The elf regarded Gandalf with calm, searching eyes. He was younger than many of his kind, yet there was steadiness in him. "We feared others might be following the orcs," he said. "I am Thalion of Greenwood." Halbarad nodded respectfully. "Then our purposes appear to be the same." They gathered among the rocks while Borin searched the dead orcs. The dwarf worked methodically, checking every pouch and scrap of gear. At length he straightened with an expression of frustration. "Nothing," he growled. "Again." Gandalf's gaze sharpened. "Again?" Borin spat into the dirt. "This makes the fourth band we've intercepted. Every one of them carried rumors of some treasure. Every one of them died protecting it. And every time we arrive, whatever they're carrying is already gone." That statement settled heavily upon the group. Gandalf withdrew the black stone and showed it briefly. Both Borin and Thalion stiffened at once. The elf's calm expression vanished. "You have one," Thalion said. The wizard nodded. Borin stared at the object with open astonishment. "By Durin's beard, so the thing truly exists." "What do you know of it?" Gandalf asked. The dwarf folded his arms. "Very little. Only old whispers. A month ago I found mention of similar stones in a forgotten record preserved by my father's people. The account was damaged and incomplete. Most of it concerned tunnels beneath mountains no map remembers. The writer called them Keys of the Deep." Gandalf felt a quiet chill. "Keys?" "Aye, though what they unlock, the record never said." The conversation ended abruptly when Thalion raised a hand for silence. The elf had turned toward the east, his keen hearing catching something beyond the reach of mortal ears. Everyone froze. For several moments nothing happened. Then a faint vibration reached them through the ground itself. Stones trembled. Dust shifted between cracks in the rock. Far away, beyond the distant hills, something enormous had moved. The trembling lasted only seconds. Yet when it ended, an uneasy silence followed. Borin looked toward the eastern mountains with narrowed eyes. Halbarad instinctively rested a hand upon the hilt of his sword. Gandalf felt the black stone grow colder within his palm. "That was no earthquake," Thalion said quietly. "No," Gandalf agreed. The remainder of the day passed beneath gathering tension. The company decided to travel together, for their separate hunts had clearly become one. As they advanced eastward, signs of recent activity grew more frequent. Tracks crossed the valleys in every direction. Fires had burned upon distant ridges. Twice they found abandoned camps. Once they discovered a dead orc hanging from a tree by chains of black iron. Someone had questioned the creature before killing it. The marks left little doubt of that. Toward evening, they entered a narrow pass winding between steep cliffs. Shadows gathered quickly there. The walls rose so high that daylight vanished long before sunset. Their footsteps echoed strangely through the confined space. More than once, Gandalf glanced upward, feeling an odd sense of familiarity he could not explain. The black stone seemed to pull gently at his awareness. Not physically. Something deeper. Like a memory struggling to surface. The pass opened at last into a hidden valley surrounded by mountains on all sides. A river wound through its center, dark beneath the fading sky. Ancient ruins stood scattered across the landscape. Broken towers, fallen walls, crumbling stairways leading nowhere. Time had worn them nearly smooth, and no road connected them to the outer world. Even Borin appeared stunned. "This place should be known," the dwarf muttered. "No settlement this large simply vanishes." Yet vanish it had. Grass-covered streets where no foot had walked for centuries. Trees grew from shattered halls, moss-concealed carvings that weather and rain had nearly erased. Gandalf moved among the ruins in silence. He felt a growing certainty that this was no ordinary forgotten city. Something older lingered here. Something buried beneath the weight of ages. As darkness approached, they climbed the remains of a hilltop structure overlooking the valley. From there they could see nearly the entire ruin. For a while, nothing moved. Then Thalion pointed toward the far northern edge of the valley. A light had appeared. Not fire, not lantern flame. A pale white glow drifted among the ruins, weaving silently between broken walls. It moved with purpose. Once it vanished behind a collapsed tower. Moments later it emerged again farther away. No figure carried it. No visible hand guided its path. The companions watched without speaking. The light continued its silent journey toward the base of the mountains. There, partly hidden by stone and shadow, stood the entrance to a vast ruin unlike the others. Massive pillars framed a dark opening cut directly into the mountain itself. The pale glow passed through the entrance and disappeared. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Gandalf spoke. "We have found the door." No one asked how he knew. The certainty in his voice was answer enough. Somewhere beyond that forgotten gateway lay the source of the stones, the reason orcs crossed half of Middle-earth to possess them, and perhaps the explanation for the ancient presence stirring beneath the mountains. As night settled over the valley, the companions prepared to descend. None of them yet understood that the greatest danger awaiting them was not hidden beyond the door, but already watching from within. The moon had not yet risen when the company descended from the hilltop ruin. Darkness spread across the valley like a slow-moving tide, filling broken streets and fallen courtyards with deep shadows. The pale light they had witnessed was gone now, leaving no trace of its passage. Gandalf led the way through the ruins with measured steps, his staff casting a faint glow whenever the ground became treacherous. Around them stood the remains of a city forgotten by every map and every tale known to living folk. The silence unsettled him more than the darkness. Even ancient ruins usually possessed some sign of life. An owl, a fox, the rustle of small creatures among the stones. Here there was nothing. As they crossed what had once been a broad avenue, Borin paused beside a shattered pillar. Thick roots had wrapped themselves around the stone, splitting it apart over centuries. The dwarf brushed away moss with a gloved hand. Beneath it emerged a carved design unlike any he recognized. It was neither the angular craftsmanship of the dwarves nor the flowing artistry of the elves. The symbol depicted a circle surrounded by 7 stars, all enclosed within a larger ring. Time had worn away part of the carving, yet enough remained to reveal deliberate craftsmanship. "I do not know this work," Borin admitted. Thalion examined it closely. "Nor do I." Gandalf studied the symbol for several moments. A faint stirring touched the edge of his memory. Not remembrance exactly, but the shadow of one. He had walked Middle-earth for many centuries and heard countless fragments of forgotten lore. Somewhere, long ago, he had encountered something similar. Yet the memory remained stubbornly beyond reach. They continued onward. The ruined gateway at the mountain's base grew larger with every step. What had seemed merely immense from afar now appeared colossal. 2 pillars flanked the entrance, each rising nearly 100 feet into the darkness above. Weather and age had scarred them, but enough detail remained to suggest extraordinary craftsmanship. Figures had once been carved into their surfaces, tall forms cloaked in flowing robes, carrying staffs crowned with stars. Halbarad frowned as he gazed upward. "They resemble wizards." "They do," Gandalf replied quietly. The ranger glanced at him. Yet there were never such kingdoms in the histories. "No," said Gandalf, "there were not." His words carried a weight that none of the others missed. The entrance itself stood open. No door remained. Beyond lay a vast darkness from which cold air flowed steadily outward. It smelled of ancient stone, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic. The scent reminded Gandalf of forgotten vaults sealed for ages beneath the earth. He halted at the threshold and listened. No sound emerged from within. Then, very softly, he heard breathing. Not close. Far below. A single slow breath rising from unimaginable depths. The sensation vanished so quickly that he could not be certain it had been real. Without another word, the company entered. The passage beyond the gateway sloped downward at a gentle angle. Their footsteps echoed through darkness so complete that even Thalion's keen eyes gained little advantage. Gandalf increased the glow of his staff, casting pale light across smooth walls of black stone. Unlike the ruins above, these halls remained largely untouched by time. Dust covered every surface, yet the structure itself showed almost no sign of collapse. Whoever had built it had possessed knowledge beyond ordinary craftsmanship. For nearly half an hour they followed the descending corridor. At length it opened into a chamber vast enough to swallow entire villages. The ceiling vanished into darkness high above. Rows of pillars stretched away in every direction. Ancient bridges crossed deep chasms cut into the floor. Gandalf stopped despite himself. Even Borin stood speechless. The hall rivaled the greatest works of Khazad-dûm. Perhaps exceeded them. The dwarf slowly turned in place. "Impossible." His voice echoed through the darkness. "My people never built this." "No," Gandalf said. "They did not." Far across the enormous chamber, dozens of pale lights drifted among the pillars. The company watched in silence as they floated soundlessly through the darkness. Some moved alone, others traveled in groups. None resembled fire. Their glow remained steady and cold. "What are they?" Halbarad whispered. "No living thing I know," Thalion answered. Gandalf remained silent. The lights stirred an old unease deep within him. They reminded him of distant things glimpsed long ago beyond the circles of the world. Not evil, yet not natural. They crossed the nearest bridge cautiously. The abyss beneath it appeared bottomless. Their light revealed nothing beyond darkness. More than once, loose pebbles slipped from beneath Borin's boots and vanished without sound. The sheer scale of the place distorted perception. Distances became impossible to judge. Structures that seemed close stood hundreds of yards away. Others appeared distant, only to emerge suddenly from the gloom. Halfway across the bridge, Gandalf felt the stone in his pouch grow cold again. Not merely cold, freezing. He stopped immediately. At that same instant, every pale light in the chamber halted. Dozens of glowing forms hung motionless among the pillars. The silence deepened. Then all the lights turned toward the company. No eyes were visible. No faces. Yet the sensation was unmistakable. Something had become aware of them. Borin's grip tightened upon his axe. Halbarad slowly drew his sword. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the lights began moving. Not toward the companions. Away. Every one of them fled deeper into the ancient halls. Within moments, the chamber stood empty once more. A strange tension eased from the air. "What frightened them?" Thalion asked. Gandalf did not answer immediately. His hand rested upon the hidden stone. A troubling possibility had occurred to him. Whatever intelligence guided those wandering lights had recognized the object in his possession. More importantly, it had feared it. The thought lingered as they reached the far side of the bridge. Beyond lay a series of smaller corridors branching through the mountain. Many passages had collapsed long ago. Others remained intact. The company followed the route marked by subtle traces of recent activity. Dust had been disturbed. Footprints crossed the floors. Once they discovered the remains of an orc camp abandoned only days earlier. Near the camp lay 3 skeletons. Not orcs. Not dwarves. Not men. The bones belonged to tall, slender beings unlike any race now dwelling in Middle-earth. Their skulls were slightly elongated. Their hands possessed 6 fingers. Though centuries had passed since death claimed them, fragments of silver armor still clung to their remains. Borin stared uneasily. "I have never seen their kind." "Nor I," said Halbarad. Gandalf crouched beside one skeleton. A heavy sadness touched him. He could not explain why. The remains seemed strangely familiar despite their alien form. Looking upon them awakened the same feeling as hearing a half-forgotten melody from childhood. Then he noticed something clutched within the skeleton's hand. A black stone. Another one. Carefully he lifted it free. The moment his fingers touched the artifact, a violent vision exploded through his mind. He saw a city of impossible grandeur beneath the mountains. Countless lights shone through vast halls. Silver-robed figures walked among towering columns, while voices sang in a language older than the sun. Then came darkness, sudden and terrible. A great shadow descended from above. Not Morgoth, not Sauron. Something different. The city shook, flames erupted, the singers fled, doors were sealed, and at the center of it all stood a solitary figure cloaked in white fire. The figure turned. For the briefest instant, Gandalf saw its face. Then the vision ended. He staggered backward. The others rushed forward at once. "Gandalf!" Halbarad exclaimed. The wizard steadied himself against the wall. His heart was pounding. "What did you see?" Thalion asked. For several moments, Gandalf could not answer. The face from the vision remained burned into his memory. Not because he recognized it. Because he should have recognized it. Somewhere, buried beneath ages of forgotten history, he had known that face. And that realization frightened him more than anything he had encountered since entering the mountain. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence within the ancient passage seemed heavier than before, as though the mountain itself were listening. Gandalf remained crouched beside the skeleton, one hand pressed against the cold stone floor while he gathered his thoughts. The vision lingered with unnatural clarity. He could still see the silver halls collapsing into chaos. He could still hear the distant cries. Most unsettling of all was the face of the figure standing amid the destruction. It haunted him not because he remembered it, but because some hidden part of his being insisted that he should. "What happened?" Halbarad asked again, keeping his voice low. Gandalf rose slowly. "I saw fragments of the past, nothing more." Borin frowned. You look as though you saw far more than that. Perhaps I did. The wizard glanced down at the second black stone in his hand. And perhaps I would rather not speak of it until I understand it myself. The answer satisfied none of them, yet no one pressed further. They had traveled long enough in dangerous company to recognize when a question had no immediate answer. The company continued deeper into the mountain. The passages grew broader and more elaborate as they descended. Carvings covered many walls, preserved from the ruin that had overtaken the city above. Strange constellations appeared repeatedly among the designs. There were depictions of stars arranged in patterns unknown to modern skies. Great towers rose beneath unfamiliar moons. Tall figures gathered around circles of white flame. Gandalf studied each carving carefully as they passed, searching for some clue that might connect these forgotten people to any tale preserved in the lore of Middle-earth. Yet no answer emerged. That troubled him deeply. Very little remained wholly unknown to the wise. Lost kingdoms, forgotten wars, vanished peoples, fragments survived in one record or another. This place should have left traces behind. Songs, legends, rumors, something. Instead, it seemed to have been erased from memory itself. Hours passed. At length, the passage opened into another enormous chamber. Unlike the first great hall, this one had not escaped destruction. Entire sections of the ceiling had collapsed. Mountains of shattered stone covered the floor. Ancient bridges hung broken over deep fissures. The air carried the stale scent of old dust undisturbed for centuries. Yet amid the devastation stood signs of recent intrusion. Torches. Not burning, but recent. Orc-made. The company halted among the shadows. They came through here, Halbarad said. Borin nodded grimly. And not long ago. The dwarf examined the tracks while the others kept watch. After a few minutes, he returned. At least 30, maybe more. They were moving fast. Toward what? Thalion asked. Before anyone could answer, a distant sound echoed through the chamber. A scream. It rose suddenly from somewhere ahead. Not human. Not orcish. Something stranger. The cry lasted only seconds before cutting off abruptly. The companions exchanged uneasy glances. Without discussion, they advanced. The tracks led through a maze of ruined corridors and collapsed halls. Several times they were forced to climb over fallen stone or squeeze through narrow gaps. The deeper they traveled, the colder the air became. Frost-coated sections of the walls despite the absence of any visible source. Their breath emerged as pale mist. Even Borin, who had spent much of his life beneath mountains, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Then they found the bodies. The orcs had died recently. Very recently. A dozen corpses lay scattered across a broad corridor lined with cracked pillars. Some had been cut down by blades. Others displayed no wounds at all. Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. One corpse remained half upright against a wall, its fingers broken where it had clawed desperately at the stone. Halbarad knelt beside it. What frightened them? No one answered. Gandalf was examining the corridor itself. Deep scratches marked the floor. Not the marks of claws. Something heavier. Something dragged. The trail continued onward into darkness. And alongside it ran another set of tracks. Bare footprints. Six-toed footprints. The same shape as the skeletons they had discovered earlier. Thalion stared at them. Impossible. Perhaps not, Gandalf said quietly. The elf looked toward him sharply. The wizard's expression had grown distant. An unsettling idea had begun taking shape in his mind. If the skeletons belonged to the builders of this place, perhaps not all of them had perished. The thought should have been absurd. No mortal race survived unchanged for thousands upon thousands of years. Yet the evidence before them suggested otherwise. Something had endured. Something still walked these halls. They followed the footprints. The path eventually led to a pair of immense bronze doors standing partially open. Time had blackened the metal, but intricate designs remained visible across their surface. Gandalf approached cautiously. The carvings depicted stars descending from the heavens toward a mountain crowned in white flame. Around the mountain stood countless figures with raised hands. At the center of the scene appeared a single larger figure. The same figure from the vision. The same face. The wizard felt his pulse quicken. Before he could study the image further, a faint sound drifted through the gap between the doors. Voices. Not echoes. Not memories. Living voices. The company extinguished their lights immediately. Moving with utmost care, they slipped through the opening. Beyond lay a vast circular chamber illuminated by pale crystals embedded within the walls. The sight that greeted them froze everyone in place. Orcs filled the chamber. Scores of them. Perhaps 50. Many carried weapons. Others stood guard near entrances leading deeper into the mountain. At the center of the hall rose a black stone dais surrounded by ancient columns. Upon that dais stood a figure unlike any living being the companions had ever seen. Tall, thin, clad in silver robes faded by unimaginable years. Its skin possessed the pale hue of moonlit marble. Long white hair fell across narrow shoulders. The face matched the skeletons, the footprints, the carvings, and the vision. The being stood motionless while the orcs watched from a respectful distance. Not prisoners. Not captors. Followers. The realization struck Gandalf like a hammer. For weeks, orcs had crossed Middle-earth carrying the black stones. They had not been seeking treasure. They had been gathering keys. The silver-robed figure slowly raised one hand. At once, the orcs fell silent. Then it spoke. The language was unknown to every member of the company. Yet Gandalf understood a single word. A name. A name buried so deeply within memory that hearing it felt like awakening from a dream older than the world. Iwendil. The wizard's breath caught. Not because the name belonged to the silver figure, because it was the ancient name of Radagast the Brown. The figure spoke it again. Then spoke another. Curunir. Saruman. Then another. Olorin. Gandalf. Himself. A cold dread settled through him. The being was not reciting random names. It was naming the Istari. Naming them in the order they had arrived in Middle-earth. And that meant only one thing. It knew exactly what Gandalf truly was. For several heartbeats, Gandalf could not move. The chamber seemed to narrow around him, while the silver-robed figure continued speaking in that forgotten tongue. The sound carried strange echoes, as though many voices whispered beneath each word. Around the dais, the orcs listened with absolute attention. There was none of the bickering or restlessness common to their kind. They stood disciplined and silent, their yellow eyes fixed upon the speaker. That alone was enough to convince Gandalf that something far more dangerous than an ancient survivor stood before them. Beside him, Halbarad leaned close. "Do they know we are here?" "I do not think so," Gandalf murmured. Yet even as he spoke, doubt touched him. The silver figure had named the Astari in their true order. That knowledge should have been impossible. The names spoken were not those known in Middle-earth. They belonged to a time before the wizards ever crossed the sea. Few living beings possessed such knowledge. Fewer still could recognize one of the Astari hidden within mortal form. The figure's speech continued. Then it raised both hands above the black dais. One by one, orcs stepped forward carrying objects wrapped in dark cloth. Gandalf immediately recognized them. More black stones, dozens of them. Some were small enough to fit in a pocket, others were larger than a man's head. The orcs placed them carefully upon the dais, forming a circle around the silver-robed being. A low vibration spread through the chamber. The floor trembled beneath their feet. The stones began to glow. Not brightly, only faintly at first. Thin lines appeared across their surfaces, revealing the same ancient markings Gandalf had discovered upon his own. Pale silver light seeped from the carvings and spread across the dais like flowing water. The silver-robed figure lowered its head and spoke a single command. Every stone answered. Light surged upward. The entire chamber filled with shimmering patterns. Images appeared in the air. The companions watched in stunned silence as a map formed above the dais. Mountains, rivers, forests, and distant seas unfolded within the glowing display. It was no ordinary map. It showed Middle-earth as it had existed thousands of years ago. Coastlines differed. Kingdoms long vanished appeared once more. Great forests stretched across lands now barren. Ancient roads crossed regions forgotten by history. Borin stared open-mouthed. "By Durin," he whispered. Then Gandalf saw something that chilled him. The map extended beyond Middle-earth. Far beyond. Shapes emerged representing lands drowned beneath the sea at the end of the First Age. Lands no mortal map should depict. One of them was unmistakable. Beleriand. The sight confirmed his fears. Whoever this being was, it remembered ages that should have passed into legend. Suddenly, the silver-robed figure stiffened. Its head turned. Not toward the map. Toward Gandalf. The movement was slow and deliberate. The chamber fell silent. Every orc looked in the same direction. The companions had been discovered. "Run," Gandalf said calmly. The first orc screamed in alarm. The second never finished drawing breath. A burst of white fire erupted from Gandalf's staff and struck the creature squarely in the chest. The orc flew backward into 3 of its companions. At the same instant, Halbarad loosed an arrow, and Thalion sprang from cover with impossible elven speed. The chamber exploded into chaos. Orcs rushed forward from every side. Borin met them head-on. His axe rose and fell in glittering arcs. Steel rang against steel. One orc collapsed, then another. The dwarf planted himself in a narrow gap between pillars, forcing the enemy to come at him in small numbers. Halbarad fought beside him while arrows flashed through the air. For a brief moment the company held. Then the silver-robed figure moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. It simply stepped from the dais. The effect was immediate. Every black stone flared with blinding light. A wave of force swept across the chamber. Pillars cracked. Dust burst from ancient walls. Gandalf drove his staff into the floor and resisted the impact, but Halbarad and Borin were thrown backward. Even Thalion stumbled. The orcs themselves seemed unaffected. They surged forward through the confusion. The silver-robed figure descended from the dais. Its pale eyes settled upon Gandalf. For the first time, the wizard saw intelligence there. Ancient intelligence, not madness, not corruption, something far more unsettling. Recognition. The being spoke. This time it used a language Gandalf understood. Olorin. The name echoed through the chamber. No one else reacted. The companions knew him only as Gandalf, yet hearing the forgotten name spoken aloud struck him like a blow. "You know me," Gandalf said. The being inclined its head slightly. "I knew you before the sun." The words sent a chill through him. Memories stirred deep within, places his mortal form could scarcely access. Fragments of timeless halls, distant music, light beyond imagining. The silver-robed figure belonged to that forgotten existence. Somehow it had survived where survival should have been impossible. Around them the battle continued. Orcs died. Others replaced them. Yet neither Gandalf nor the silver-robed being seemed aware of the struggle any longer. "You are Maya," Gandalf said quietly. The figure's expression changed. Not quite a smile. Not quite sorrow. "I was." The answer deepened the mystery rather than solving it. No, Maya ceased to be Maya, not while existence endured. "What are you?" Gandalf demanded. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the ancient face. Then came the reply. "I am what remained." Before Gandalf could question further, a tremendous crash shook the chamber. One of the great pillars collapsed under the strain of battle and ancient damage. Stone blocks thundered downward, orcs scattered, dust filled the air, the ceiling above groaned ominously. The silver-robed figure looked upward. For the first time, genuine alarm crossed its features. "No." The single word carried unexpected fear. Then the floor beneath the dais split open. A crack raced across the chamber like lightning through stone. Ancient masonry shattered. Entire sections of the floor collapsed into darkness below. Orcs screamed as they vanished into the abyss. The glowing map disintegrated. Black stones rolled in every direction. Another shock followed. Then another. Something far beneath the city was awakening. The silver-robed figure turned toward the widening chasm. Its calm had vanished completely. The ancient being stared downward as if confronting a nightmare long buried. When it spoke again, the words were barely audible. "It cannot be." Then a roar rose from the depths. Not the roar of an animal. Not the cry of any creature known in Middle-earth. It sounded like mountains grinding together. Like entire caverns collapsing. Like something imprisoned for thousands of years finally opening its eyes. Every living being in the chamber froze. Orcs. Elves. Men. Dwarf. Wizard. All stood motionless as the terrible sound rolled upward through the foundations of the forgotten city. And for the first time since meeting the silver-robed figure, Gandalf realized there was something here that even it feared. The roar continued to rise through the depths beneath the ruined city, swelling until the stone beneath every foot vibrated like the skin of a great drum, while dust poured from cracks in the ceiling and ancient pillars groaned under stresses they had not endured since forgotten ages. The orcs who moments earlier had fought with savage confidence now stared toward the widening chasm in naked terror, and many began retreating despite the shouted commands of their leaders. Gandalf watched the silver-robed figure closely, for the ancient being's reaction revealed more than any answer it had spoken. Fear was written plainly across its face, not the fear of sudden danger, but the fear of a catastrophe long expected and long dreaded. Whatever was awakening below, it was older than the orcs, older than the ruined city, and perhaps older even than the secret history buried beneath these mountains. Chunks of stone broke away from the edges of the chasm and disappeared into darkness without ever striking a visible bottom. A strange light now pulsed far below, faint at first but steadily brightening, and it illuminated immense layers of architecture hidden beneath the chamber. Gandalf caught glimpses of descending terraces, colossal stairways, and vast halls carved into the mountain's heart, all of them extending downward beyond sight. The city they had entered was merely the uppermost level of something vastly larger. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. Entire kingdoms had risen and fallen upon the surface of Middle-earth, while this hidden realm remained buried and forgotten beneath their feet. Borin staggered toward the wizard through the confusion, his beard coated with dust and his axe stained black with orc blood. "Tell me we are leaving," the dwarf shouted over the noise as another tremor shook the chamber. "Tell me this mystery is solved enough for sensible folk." Gandalf almost smiled, despite the danger, for Borin's bluntness remained remarkably intact, even at the edge of disaster. Before he could answer, the silver-robed figure turned sharply toward them and began crossing the fractured floor with surprising speed, its long robes flowing behind it like pale smoke. "You must listen," the being said, and for the first time its voice carried urgency rather than calm authority. "There is little time remaining, and ignorance will destroy all of you." Halbarad immediately raised his sword, while Thalion stepped between the stranger and the others, yet the ancient figure paid no attention to their weapons. Its eyes remained fixed upon Gandalf. "You came seeking the Anomaly," it continued. "You believed it was me. You were mistaken." The mountain shuddered again, and a distant crash echoed upward from the abyss. "I am merely the survivor." Gandalf studied the being carefully, while chaos unfolded around them. Orcs fled toward distant exits. Others abandoned their weapons entirely. Several had already vanished into side passages. Yet a small group remained near the shattered dais, apparently torn between obedience and fear. "Then tell me what is awakening," Gandalf said. "Tell me what could terrify one who remembers the world before the sun." The silver-robed figure closed its eyes briefly, as though the memory itself caused pain. When it spoke again, each word emerged with deliberate clarity. "In the youth of Arda, before the first wars against Morgoth reached these lands, there were spirits who entered the world but chose neither his service nor that of the Valor. Most passed unnoticed, some vanished, a few sought knowledge above all else." The being glanced toward the abyss, where the growing light now illuminated enormous sections of the lower city. "One among them discovered things hidden even from the wise. It learned how memory itself could be shaped, concealed, and consumed. It hungered for every secret ever spoken, every name, every history, every thought." A terrible possibility formed in Gandalf's mind. He had spent centuries gathering knowledge and preserving memory against the darkness of the world. The idea of a power devoted to consuming memory struck him as profoundly unnatural. "Amaya," he said quietly. "Yes," replied the silver-robed figure. "Amaya who abandoned wisdom and became obsessed with possession. It sought not dominion like Sauron, nor destruction like Morgoth. It desired ownership of all remembrance. It wished to become the sole keeper of every truth that had ever existed." Another roar surged upward from the depths, and this time the sound carried something beneath it. Voices, countless voices, fragments of speech, laughter, songs, cries. Languages separated by thousands of years blended together into a vast and horrifying chorus. Every hair upon Gandalf's neck rose. He recognized snippets of ancient Quenya, fragments of Khuzdul, forgotten Mannish tongues, and dozens of languages he could not identify. It was as though entire histories had been trapped below and were now struggling to escape. The silver-robed figure turned toward the sound with visible anguish. "My people discovered it long ago. We believed we could imprison it. We were fools." For the first time, genuine sorrow entered its voice. "We built this city around the prison. We forged the stones you carry. We used them to seal pathways between its mind and the world beyond. For a time, we succeeded. Then came disaster. The creature learned how to feed upon memory itself. It devoured our history, our names, our achievements. Entire generations vanished from remembrance. Even after our deaths, the world forgot us." The revelation struck the companions into silence. Gandalf suddenly understood why no record of this civilization remained. The city had not simply been lost, its existence had been consumed. Every scrap of memory connected to it had gradually faded from the minds of other peoples until almost nothing remained. Only fragments hidden beyond ordinary remembrance had survived. The black stones were not keys opening a prison. They were locks maintaining it. "And the orcs?" Halbarad asked. "The creature called to them through dreams," the silver-robed figure replied. "It promised treasures, power, knowledge. It manipulated them into gathering the scattered stones. Each stone removed weakened the prison. Every stone brought here opened another path." The being looked around the collapsing chamber. Today the final barriers failed. A thunderous crack interrupted further explanation. One side of the chamber collapsed entirely, revealing a vast gulf beyond. Through the swirling dust, Gandalf saw something moving far below. At first he mistook it for shifting architecture. Then he realized no building could move with such deliberate purpose. An immense shape was rising through the buried levels of the city. It possessed no clear form. Parts of it resembled smoke. Other sections seemed woven from light and shadow. Faces appeared briefly within its depths before dissolving. Entire scenes flickered across its surface like reflections in disturbed water. The sight filled Gandalf with profound unease because he recognized some of those faces. They belonged to people he had known. Elves long dead, men whose kingdoms had vanished. Even a glimpse of Bilbo Baggins appeared for the briefest instant before melting away into darkness. The thing below was carrying stolen memories within itself, preserving them not from kindness, but from hunger. It had become a living vault of consumed histories. The silver-robed figure stepped forward, its expression hardening with resolve. "I cannot destroy it," the being said. "I failed long ago, and my strength has diminished through ages beyond counting. But the prison may still be restored." It looked directly at Gandalf. "The stones must be returned to their places. Everyone that remains. The seals can be renewed if we reach the heart of the lower city before the creature fully awakens." Gandalf turned toward the abyss, where the immense shape continued its ascent through forgotten halls. Already the air felt different. Memories flickered unexpectedly through his thoughts. Faces appeared and vanished. Names slipped away before he could grasp them. The danger was no longer hidden beneath the mountain. It was spreading. Then he tightened his grip upon his staff and nodded. "Very well," he said. "We descend." Neither fear nor doubt remained in his voice, for he finally understood the true conflict before them. The mystery of the forgotten city no longer mattered. The question of the silver-robed survivor no longer mattered. If the creature below escaped its prison, entire ages of Middle-earth could be erased from memory forever, and every victory won against darkness would eventually be forgotten, as though it had never happened at all. The descent began almost immediately, for every moment they delayed allowed the awakening power below to grow stronger, and already the air throughout the shattered city seemed charged with a subtle distortion that unsettled thought itself. Guided by the silver-robed survivor, the company crossed fractured bridges and broken stairways that spiraled downward through levels unseen by any living race for countless ages. Around them stretched an underground realm of astonishing scale. Entire districts lay buried beneath the mountain, preserved in eerie silence despite the passing of millennia. Towers rose from cavern floors like pale ghosts of a forgotten age. Long avenues vanished into darkness. Vast domes gleamed faintly beneath veins of crystal embedded in the rock. Yet all that grandeur now trembled under the pressure of the thing awakening beneath it. As they descended, Gandalf became aware of a growing difficulty that alarmed him more than the earthquakes or collapsing stone. Thoughts slipped away with unnatural ease. More than once he found himself forgetting what he had intended to say. Names hovered at the edge of memory before fading. Even familiar faces seemed briefly uncertain. He remembered Bilbo, then for an instant struggled to recall the color of the hobbit's eyes. The loss lasted only a moment, yet it left him deeply disturbed. The creature was already feeding, not upon flesh or spirit, but upon remembrance itself. The silver-robed being sensed his concern. While leading them through a gallery lined with ancient statues, it spoke without turning. You feel it reaching outward. The prison was designed to contain its influence, but now cracks exist everywhere. The longer it remains free, the farther its hunger will spread. Gandalf looked toward the towering statues as they passed. Their faces had been worn smooth, not by time but by something stranger. Features dissolved into blankness. Names carved beneath them had vanished entirely. The sight served as a warning more eloquent than any speech. Borin slowed beside one of the statues and ran a hand across the featureless stone. "This is what happened to your people," he said quietly. "Not death, erasure." The silver-robed figure paused for the briefest moment. A sorrow older than kingdoms flickered across its pale face. "Death would have been kinder. The world forgot us while we still lived. Fathers ceased remembering sons. Scholars forgot knowledge they had spent centuries gathering. We watched our own history disappear piece by piece, until nothing remained but fragments hidden behind the seals." The path eventually brought them to an immense circular shaft descending through the heart of the mountain. Hundreds of bridges crossed the void at different levels, connecting towers and platforms suspended over a darkness illuminated by shifting silver light far below. The sight stole breath from every member of the company. It was not merely architecture. It was a masterpiece of impossible ambition. The builders of this city had shaped the mountain itself into a monument. Yet even here the signs of corruption were visible. Sections of bridges had dissolved into dust. Entire towers leaned at unnatural angles. Strange shadows drifted through the depths below. As they crossed one of the highest spans, a distant sound echoed upward from beneath. It resembled conversation carried across a great distance. Halbarad stopped and listened carefully. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Thalion nodded slowly, his sharp senses catching details beyond mortal hearing. Gandalf listened as well, and a cold unease settled over him. The voices belonged to people he knew. He heard fragments of speech spoken by Elrond in Rivendell. He heard Bilbo laughing beside a fire. He heard the voice of Aragorn speaking words that had never been uttered in this place. None of it was real. The creature was drawing memories from their minds and reflecting them back. The bridge suddenly trembled beneath their feet. Shadows surged upward from below like black mist driven by an unseen wind. Faces appeared within the darkness. Hundreds of faces. Thousands. Some belonged to elves. Others to men, dwarves, hobbits, unknown peoples from forgotten ages. They emerged only long enough to stare before dissolving once more. The company broke into a run. Behind them, the shadows spilled across the bridge, consuming stone wherever they touched. Ancient masonry crumbled and vanished as though centuries passed in an instant. Ahead lay a massive gateway formed from silver-black metal, unlike any substance Gandalf had encountered. Intricate patterns covered its surface. Around the frame rested dozens of sockets carved into the surrounding stone. Some remained occupied by black stones. Many stood empty. The silver-robed figure stopped before the gate and raised one trembling hand. "This is the final seal," it said. "Beyond this door lies the prison's heart." Its gaze moved across the empty sockets. "The stones carried here by the orcs must be returned. Only then can the barrier be restored." The company worked quickly despite the danger. Gandalf and the others gathered the recovered stones while the survivor placed them into the vacant sockets. One by one, the ancient artifacts settled into place. Each insertion caused faint lines of silver light to spread across the doorway. Yet many sockets still remained empty. The orcs had brought dozens of stones to the city, and not all had survived the collapse above. Time was slipping away. The shadows behind them continued advancing through the shaft, carrying with them the whispering voices of stolen memories. Then a new sound emerged from the darkness. Laughter. Not mocking laughter. Not cruel laughter. Warm laughter. Familiar laughter. Gandalf froze. For a terrible moment he heard the voice of Frodo Baggins, though the hobbit had not yet undertaken the journey that would one day change the fate of the world. The voice carried impossible memories. Memories from futures that had not happened. The creature was no longer feeding merely upon the past. It was reaching toward possibilities, devouring fragments of what might yet come to pass. The realization horrified him. If allowed to grow stronger, it could consume not only history but destiny itself. The silver-robed figure saw understanding dawn within the wizard's eyes. "Now you see why it could never be permitted freedom," the ancient being said. "It does not distinguish between what was, what is, and what may be. All memory becomes nourishment." The final stone slid into place. Light erupted across the gateway. Ancient symbols blazed to life. The enormous door shuddered and began opening inward. Beyond lay a chamber of breathtaking size. At its center rose a vast column of silver fire extending from floor to ceiling. Around that pillar floated countless fragments of light, each one containing images, voices, and memories preserved within the prison. Entire histories revolved through the air like stars orbiting a sun. Yet the pillar was fractured. Great cracks ran through its length. Darkness poured from those wounds in slow, twisting currents. And there, suspended within the heart of the broken seal, hung the creature itself. It possessed no true shape. Its body seemed woven from memories stolen across the ages. Faces emerged and vanished across its surface. Cities appeared and dissolved. Battles flickered. Songs echoed. Entire lives unfolded in moments before being swallowed again. The thing was immense now, far larger than it had appeared from above. It filled the chamber with its presence. Then it became aware of them. Thousands of eyes opened simultaneously across its shifting form. The chamber fell silent. And Gandalf understood that the final struggle would decide not merely whether the Forgotten City survived, but whether the memory of Middle-earth itself would endure into the ages yet to come. The creature regarded them through a multitude of shifting eyes that appeared and vanished across its immense form, while the chamber trembled beneath the strain of forces that had remained confined for ages beyond memory. Around the towering pillar of silver fire drifted fragments of stolen history, and Gandalf saw entire lifetimes unfolding within them. A child took his first steps in a village long turned to dust. A king received a crown whose kingdom no longer existed. An elf gazed upon the light of the two trees beneath a sky untouched by sun or moon. All these memories circled the prison like leaves caught within a storm, imprisoned alongside the thing that had stolen them. The creature spoke without moving, and its voice emerged from every corner of the chamber at once. Thousands of voices blended into one, creating a sound that seemed woven from centuries of speech. Gandalf heard men, elves, dwarves, and tongues older than any race now living. Beneath them all lingered a deeper note that belonged to something far more ancient. "Olorin," it said, using the name hidden beneath his mortal form, "you have crossed great distances to preserve what cannot endure. Why struggle against forgetting when all things are destined to fade?" As the words echoed through the chamber, fragments of memory drifted toward the creature and vanished into its substance. Gandalf stepped forward, planting his staff firmly upon the stone floor while silver light from the fractured prison danced across his weathered face. "Because memory gives meaning to endurance," he replied. "Because every life matters, whether it lasts 1,000 years or a single season. Because the deeds of the humble deserve remembrance no less than the deeds of kings." The creature's surface rippled. Faces emerged briefly within the darkness. Some appeared thoughtful, others seemed sorrowful, yet countless more reflected only hunger. Gandalf understood then that the being no longer possessed a single will. It had consumed so much over the ages that fragments of every stolen mind remained trapped within it. The silver-robed survivor moved beside the wizard and gazed upward at the towering mass suspended within the prison. "You were not always this," the ancient being said quietly. "There was wisdom in you once. There was curiosity. There was wonder." For a fleeting instant, the chamber grew still. The creature's shifting form slowed. A single face emerged from the darkness, clearer than the others. It possessed neither malice nor madness. It appeared weary beyond measure. Then the moment passed, and the face dissolved back into the storm of stolen memories. "You speak as though I chose this fate," the creature answered. "I sought knowledge, I sought understanding, yet every secret revealed another beyond it. Every answer opened new questions. I desired to preserve what time would destroy." The countless eyes turned toward the silver-robed figure. "Your people feared what I had become, and so they built a cage around me." The chamber shook violently as darkness surged through the cracks in the pillar. "But memory cannot be imprisoned forever." The silver-robed survivor lowered its head. "No," it said, "memory cannot, yet hunger can." There was neither anger nor accusation in the words, only sadness. Gandalf sensed then that the ancient conflict between these beings had never been a war of good against evil in the ordinary sense. It had begun as a tragedy. A desire to preserve had become a need to possess. A love of knowledge had transformed into endless consumption. the Maya imprisoned below had not sought dominion over Middle-earth. It had sought ownership of every story ever told, and in doing so had nearly erased them all. The cracks within the pillar widened. Silver fire flared violently. The chamber trembled. Gandalf realized the prison could not survive much longer in its present state. Either the seal would be restored now, or it would fail completely. He turned toward the survivor. What must be done? The ancient being looked at the pillar, and then toward the wizard. Understanding passed silently between them. Neither needed further explanation. The prison required more than stones and ancient mechanisms. It required a will strong enough to bind the creature once more. The survivor stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "My people built this prison," it said. "Its burden belongs to me." For the first time since their meeting, a faint smile touched its face. "I remained behind because someone had to remember what was lost." The being turned toward Gandalf. "You asked what I am. Now I can answer. I was called Ilarion before memory abandoned my people. I was never the Anomaly. I was merely the last witness." Before anyone could object, Ilarion walked toward the pillar of silver fire. Light gathered around the ancient figure, illuminating robes faded by thousands of years. The darkness within the prison reacted immediately. Faces surged toward him. Voices screamed. Memories swirled like a storm. Yet he continued forward without hesitation. Gandalf felt a profound respect rise within him. Across all his long years in Middle-earth, he had seldom witnessed courage greater than this. As Ilarion entered the pillar, the entire chamber erupted with light. Silver fire surged upward through the cracks. Ancient symbols blazed across walls, floors, and ceilings. The black stones embedded within the seal answered as one. Their light spread through the city above and below, racing along forgotten pathways built in ages now almost erased. The creature writhed within the prison. Countless memories burst from its form and filled the chamber. Gandalf saw cities, forests, battles, friendships, songs, and ordinary lives flashing through the air around him. The stolen histories of uncounted generations were being released. The creature cried out, and its voice carried neither rage nor hatred. It carried grief. Gandalf understood why. For the first time in ages, the being was losing what it had hoarded. The memories it had consumed were returning to the world beyond its grasp. The prison closed around it while silver light sealed every fracture. Yet even as the darkness diminished, Gandalf glimpsed that weary face once more within the storm. There was relief in its expression. Relief and exhaustion. Then it vanished forever. The light intensified until none could look directly upon it. Tremors shook the mountain. Ancient halls collapsed. Towers crumbled. Entire sections of the forgotten city began falling into the depths below. Gandalf shouted for the others to retreat. Together they fled through corridors illuminated by rivers of silver fire. Behind them, the prison sealed itself completely. The city built around it had fulfilled its purpose and was now passing into ruin. Yet the force contained below would never again reach the surface world. Their escape became a desperate race against destruction. Bridges collapsed moments after they crossed them. Stairways shattered beneath falling stone. Dust filled the air so thickly that breathing became difficult. More than once, Gandalf feared they would never reach the upper levels. Yet fortune and determination carried them onward. At last they emerged through the great gateway at the mountain's base, just as dawn broke across the hidden valley. The companions stood among the ruins and watched the mountains tremble. Deep rumbles echoed from beneath the earth. Sections of the valley floor sank slowly as buried chambers collapsed far below. Then, little by little, the violence subsided. Silence returned. Cool morning air flowed through the valley. Birds began singing among the ruins for the first time since their arrival. The sound felt strangely precious. For a long while, nobody spoke. Then Borin drew a deep breath and looked toward the mountains. "Will anyone remember this?" he asked. Gandalf considered the question carefully before answering. "Not all of it," he said. "Perhaps not even most of it. Yet some things endure, even when history fades. Courage endures. Friendship endures. The choice to stand against darkness endures." His gaze rested upon the silent peaks where Ilarion and his people had vanished forever. And sometimes that is enough. The company departed the valley before sunset. Behind them, the forgotten city passed once more into secrecy. No songs would celebrate its fall. No chronicles would fully preserve its story. Yet fragments would survive. A rumor here, a strange memory there. Enough to ensure that the sacrifice of the last witness was not wholly lost. Years later, when Gandalf reflected upon the many roads he had traveled, he rarely spoke of the hidden city beneath the mountains. Some mysteries belonged to silence. Yet he never forgot Ilarion. He never forgot the creature that had hungered for every memory in the world. And whenever he sat beside a fire, listening to hobbits tell simple stories of harvests, birthdays, and journeys down familiar roads, he listened with unusual care. For he had learned in those forgotten depths that the greatest treasure in Middle-earth was not power, nor wisdom, nor ancient lore, but memory itself, carried from one generation to the next by ordinary voices, determined not to let the light of the past fade into darkness.
Привітик. Після цієї історії в мене залишилась думка, що деякі речі виживають не тому, що вони великі чи могутні, а тому, що хтось уперто відмовився їх забути. Мені здається, ми часто думаємо, що історія зберігає все важливе сама по собі. Але якщо подивитися уважніше, майже з кожною пам'яттю стоїть якась конкретна людина. Хтось пам'ятав ім'я, хтось щось переповідав, стару історію там якось біля свого столу, дитині казочку на ніч. Хтось, хто не викинув пожовклу фотографію, не спалив листа, не дозволив минулому остаточно розчинитися в часі. Іноді доля цілої родини, дружби або навіть народу тримається на таких тихих хранителях пам'яті, про яких майже ніхто не знає. Мене завжди вражало, що забуття приходить природньо, без зусиль, але пам'ять вимагає турботи. Вона потребує когось, хто свідомо несе її далі, навіть коли це незручно або боляче. І, мабуть, саме тому деякі історії переживають століття, не тому, що час був до них якийсь милостивий, а тому, що десь знайшлася людина, яка просто не погодилася відпустити їх у темряву. Дякую всім за увагу. З вами був ваш Блукач.